Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back quite literally into the ancient layers of daily life in Mesopotamia. Imagine this: the low, lazy hiss of the Tigris River brushing by your ankles as you gather up armfuls of linen from a wooden line strung between two crooked fig trees. Clay brick walls cast long shadows across the courtyard, and somewhere nearby a donkey sneezes. You're not royalty yet, but you're dressed like someone who has opinions about embroidery-scented oils, and whose turn it is to fetch the river water. The breeze teases your tunic, but it's what's underneath that we're really here for. Ancient Mesopotamian fashion didn't begin with grand robes or golden belts. No, it started deeper, closer to the skin and fabric layers that were never supposed to see the light of day. These hidden garments reveal more than you'd expect. Not just how women dressed, but how they lived. Moved, sweated, flirted, and folded laundry. In a world that was hot, hierarchical, and surprisingly concerned with smelling like cedar wood. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when folks are tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step barefoot through a courtyard just after dawn. The clay beneath your feet still holds the memory of yesterday's sun, and your fingers grip a stack of folded linen tunics that didn't quite finish drying overnight. You flick one of the garments open, it's light, loosely woven, and smells faintly of smoke and lavender. The unofficial scent combination of Mesopotamian domestic life. What are you wearing underneath? Well, if you're part of the upper crust like a noblewoman in Ur around 2100 BCE, the first layer against your skin is likely a soft, undyed linen shift. It's thin but well made, stitched by hand, maybe even embroidered around the neckline, not to show off, but simply because you know it's there. It's a little itchy, but in a comforting, familiar way. Like your favorite pair of socks that you still wear, even though they have that one hole. This underlayer serves more than modesty. It's functional, absorbing sweat, protecting your fancier outer robes from wear, and giving your skin a break from coarse fibers. Linen spun from flax breathes easily in the Mesopotamian heat, and since you own at least a few shifts, you can rotate through them, while the others are airing out on days when the wind isn't busy, flinging them into the neighbor's barley plot. The more elite you are, the finer your linen. There's even speculation that some textiles included ultra-soft threads from foreign lands, possibly cotton from the Indus Valley, though historians still argue whether such imports were used for underclothes or saved for outer garb. Either way, it's safe to say your underlayer might come with a bit of bragging rights. Now let's step over into the neighbor's courtyard, not just to collect your runaway tunic, but to peek at daily life in a different class. She's a brewer's wife, not poor, but not flush with temple silver either. Her underlayers still linen, but heavier, possibly reused from older tunics patched and mended so many times they tell a story of their own. She ties hers with a woven sash, a simple one, nothing fancy, just enough to keep the fabric from gaping open when she bends to scoop malt. It's practical, a little frumpy, and precisely what you'd expect from someone whose main concern is don't catch fire near the oven. And what about you? You might be adjusting that sash every 10 minutes because, let's be honest, linen doesn't like to stay put. Pins aren't really a thing yet, at least not for underwear. So you're relying on knots, gravity, and maybe a bit of wishful thinking. You're interrupted by the fluttering sound of a small robe sliding off the drying line another day. Another armful of warm laundry. You sigh, balancing it all on your hip as you glance up at the sky. The sun's barely halfway risen and already your underlayers are clinging slightly. That's life here. Sticky, sun-warmed, and draped in cloth. Meanwhile, far across town, a temple scribe stirs in her chambers. Her undergarments probably more ceremonial. Maybe layered with tiny stitch symbols or washed in special oils meant to purify the soul, though some scholars debate whether this was actual ritual or just really fancy hygiene. Either way, she has someone to do her laundry for her, and the river's scent never touches her robes unless it's been strained through a dozen ceremonial filters first. Back in your own courtyard, you lean against the doorway. Your linen shift rustles faintly in the breeze. A thread tickles your arm, and you make a mental note to mend that later. Maybe during tonight's moonlight sewing circle, where the conversation always drifts toward the scandal of the week, whose husband came home late from the ziggurat, whose daughter wore her underlayer outside, and whether you can really get rid of pit stains using barley ash. As the morning stretches forward, the city hums to life. Children chase each other past shrines. Chickens strut near granaries, and you, wrapped in soft, slightly rumpled linen, smile quietly to yourself. Your underlayers might not be fancy, but they're yours. And in a world of stiff outer robes and ceremonial stiffness, that first layer of cloth is a tiny patch of comfort, invisibly yours. The sun climbs higher over the rooftops of Ur, casting jagged shadows across the mud brick alleyways as you step back inside. The air inside your home is marginally cooler, filtered through woven mats and thick walls that have seen centuries of sweat secrets and silkless slumber. You set the bundle of laundry down and smooth your own tunic, but tonight, we're not focused on the layers everyone sees. We're getting closer. Closer to the skin, closer to what elite Mesopotamian women wore beneath their outerwear and why it mattered more than you'd think. So let's begin with the elite. The uppermost echelons of society, where your title is longer than your laundry list in your closet, smells faintly of frankincense and ambition. You duck into the inner room, stepping softly on reed mats woven by someone 3 tax classes below you. If you're a noblewoman, you probably have at least 1 or 2 female servants, maybe more, who help you dress. Not because you're incapable, but because layering even simple garments with grace takes time. Especially when there are no zippers, no elastic bands, and your clothing is basically a glorified jigsaw puzzle of linen rectangles and decorative cords. Now the underlayer, if you're wealthy, it's no longer just linen. Oh no. This shift might be edged with fine embroidery or even woven with tiny metallic threads near the hem. Just subtle enough to remind you and your dressing maid that you're not the kind of woman who wears unfinished hems. It's sewn to fit your body loosely but intentionally with narrow shoulder straps, and a neckline scooped just enough to sit below your outer robe's decorative edge. Historians have found remnants of linen shifts buried in tombs, or referenced in tablets, some so finely made they seem almost transparent. Were they intended to be seductive, maybe? Were they expensive enough to fund a small sheep farm? Probably. And were they ever seen in public? Almost never. That's part of their magic. Your underlayer does more than just protect your fancier clothing. It's where comfort lives. Where you might store a tiny amulet sewn discreetly into the seam, or a few strands of perfume-soaked wool to keep you smelling like cedar and myrrh, even when the sun's doing its worst. Some women even wore thin belts over the underlayer to cinch the waist slightly before putting on their outer robes, an early form of shaping, though thankfully without the modern torture of corsets or waist trainers. And here's where it gets even more intimate. Textiles themselves carried meaning. A noblewoman's linen might be bleached nearly white, a luxury in an age where sun bleaching took weeks and patience, both of which could be outsourced if you were rich enough. Whiter fabric meant you weren't laboring in the fields. You had shade. You had servants. You had a life scented with almonds and sandalwood rather than sweat and barley mash. But there's a catch. White linen stains. Easily. Which is why elite women often rotated multiple underlayers, some for ceremonial use, others for daily wear, and still others for moments when modesty had to be paired with movement like dancing, walking through temple courtyards, or supervising, weaving in the back workshop. Let's not pretend all elite women were delicate either. Some ran estates, others served as priestesses or scribes. Their underlayers had to keep up. Imagine dashing through a hallway with scrolls under one arm, your embroidered robe flapping dramatically behind you, and beneath that linen shift, slightly sweat damp at the back, but too dignified to be noticed. That's power dressing Mesopotamian style. Now shift the focus to special events, ceremonies, banquets, temple offerings. In those cases, your underlayer might be starched with natural substances to create that satisfying swish when you walk. Some evidence even suggests the use of naturally glossy flax, polished using river stones or wood rollers. The result? A linen underlayer that caught the lamplight just enough to shimmer as you moved. A whisper of luxury visible only when the wind or mischief lifted the outer robe just so. Of course not. Everyone approved of showing underlayers even accidentally. Some temple records include rules about what women could or couldn't reveal in public, which leads to one of the quieter debates among historians. Were these rules about morality or about class? Was it scandalous to show your shift because it was immodest or because it hinted that you didn't own enough outerwear to cover it? The answer, predictably, is both. Context was everything. In some city-states, a glimpse of underlayer might signal flirtation. In others, it might just mean you were too busy supervising the wine storehouse to notice the wind had flipped your robe sideways. You ease into a cushioned seat near the window. Outside, the city stirs with the slow grace of a heat-struck afternoon. You think about how your underlayers have evolved with you, stitched with more precision as you grew older, bleached more carefully, perfumed more subtly. They're part of your rhythm now. You wear them like skin, but with better stitching. And then there's one last little detail: tags. Well, not modern clothing tags, of course, but tiny identifying stitches hidden in the hem. Some scholars believe elite households had their own needlework symbols, stitched into their linen underclothes like a family brand. Imagine lifting a shift to fold it and spotting a tiny, discreet zigzag in red thread proof that it belongs to House Enlil or Lady Ninshber's residence. The ancient Mesopotamian version of "please return if found." As you stretch and sigh, the linen rustling softly around your body, you're reminded of just how much went on beneath the surface. Not just in fashion, but in life. And though no one outside your household might ever see what you're wearing underneath, it carries meaning status, even affection sewn quietly into every fiber. Outside your doorway, the faint sounds of a market morning begin to stir. Donkeys grumble, pot lids clatter, and somewhere nearby a vendor is already calling out prices for pomegranates no one asked for yet. But you're inside carefully folding layers of linen with practiced hands, preparing to wrap yourself in what could only be described as a wearable puzzle. Because tonight you're learning how to dress without a single button snap or Velcro tab in sight. Welcome to the art of draping like a goddess. You pick up your underlayer smooth and cool from the shaded stone ledge. There are no sleeves to slide your arms through, no side seams to guide you. Just a long rectangular sheet of linen, loosely woven and waiting to be coaxed into shape. The trick, of course, is that there is no trick. It's all about gravity tucks and the occasional muttered prayer to Inanna that it doesn't come undone mid-walk. You stand barefoot, arms lifted slightly, and let the fabric fall over your shoulders. One corner gets tucked under your right arm, the other brought across the chest around the back, and tied off at the left hip with a braided sash. Voila, a one-piece garment, sort of like a toga, but more Mesopotamian and about 72% more prone to coming undone if you sneeze too hard. But don't worry, you're not alone. Women across Mesopotamia wrap their clothing this way, from temple servants to noble wives. The method varied slightly depending on your region or your rank, but the principle remained the same: wrap, tuck, adjust, and hope for a windless day. Historians have puzzled over how such garments stayed in place. Some suggest belts, thin cords made of plant fiber, or even silver thread for the elite. Others believe decorative brooches might have been used to secure strategic folds. And there's always the good old-fashioned layer it until it stops moving approach. The results could be surprisingly elegant. A properly wrapped underlayer, snug but breathable, gave just enough structure to support the heavy outer robes worn over it. It framed the body in long, clean lines, modest but far from shapeless. And when you walked, that fabric swayed like tall reeds in river wind. Of course not everyone got it right. You recall a story whispered at a courtyard gathering about a young bride who wrapped her shift the wrong direction, left over right instead of right over left, and caused a mild scandal at her own wedding feast. Apparently, that direction was reserved for funeral attire. The food was good, the company better, but the gossip impeccable. And here's where things get quirky. Some draping styles were specific to certain rites or holidays. A priestess, for example, might tie her underlayer differently on feast days, perhaps looping the sash twice to symbolize divine cycles, or using a dyed cord to honor a particular god. One fragmentary tablet from Nipper suggests that wrapping from left shoulder down was meant to mimic the arc of the crescent moon. Do modern scholars agree on this? Not entirely. But it sounds poetic enough to be true. What we do know is that draping was often a communal art. Young girls learned from mothers and aunts practicing on scraps until they could do it in the dark. Sometimes literally when early morning rituals required dressing by lamplight. There's even a theory that noble households employed wrap maids women whose sole job was to assist with draping and smoothing linen layers. You know you've made it when someone else is assigned to tie your sash. And let's not ignore the weather's role in this little cloth ballet. The hotter the day, the looser the drape. Some underlayers were folded to allow for small slits along the side, offering a welcome breeze where it mattered most. Others were layered tighter in winter, trapping heat between fabric folds like a primitive thermal blanket. Though, to be fair, no amount of linen really keeps you warm when the Tigris wind decides to turn against you. Back in your home, you finish tying your sash and give it a gentle tug. It holds. For now. You lift your arms, twist left and right. No slippage. Victory? Stepping outside, the early light reflects off the rooftops and clay walls, and a neighbor waves as she balances a basket of flatbreads on her hip. Her underlayer peeks out beneath a cobalt-dyed robe, and for a brief moment you both share a nod of mutual understanding. These garments may look simple, but keeping them on and graceful takes real effort. One more little-known fact, elite women sometimes embroidered messages or prayers into the hems of their underlayers. Not for others to see, just for themselves. A name, a favorite verse, even a complaint about the laundry maid, stitched in tiny passive-aggressive knots. It's the ancient version of journaling if your journal could also be worn and occasionally smelled like river soap. You pass through the courtyard with slow, purposeful steps. Your underlayer rustles against your legs, a sound that would mean little to outsiders, but to you, signals readiness, dignity, maybe even a hint of flirtation, depending on how you tied your sash that morning. Draped, tied, and modestly magnificent, you're now fully dressed underneath. The outer layers can wait. Because you know something most modern folks don't, it's what rests closest to your skin that really sets the tone for the day. You're up early, wandering through the courtyard again, this time barefoot, and with a cup of barley milk in one hand. The linen of your underlayer still smells faintly of the cedar-lined chest it was stored in overnight. You're dressed technically, but not completely. Something's missing. Something controversial. You pause at the edge of your bed platform, frown down at your neatly folded belongings, and ask the question Mesopotamian scholars have been wrestling with for decades. Did you wear underwear? And if so, what kind? Let's talk loincloths. The archaeological evidence is at best ambiguous. Some clay figurines appear to be wearing what looks like narrow cloth bands wrapped around the waist and between the legs, the Mesopotamian answer to the bikini brief. Others wear nothing at all. And then there are cylinder seals, those tiny carved stones used to roll impressions onto clay. which sometimes show women mid-dance, mid-worship, or mid-laundry, seemingly covered in only flowing linen, but no distinct undergarments. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian women actually wore loincloths regularly, or if they were reserved for specific situations, rituals, athletic games, even heat relief during scorching harvest seasons. Some argue that what appears to be a loincloth might actually be a long sash used to tie outer garments, mistaken by modern eyes eager to find the ancient roots of fruit of the loom. But let's imagine for a moment that you do wear one. You pick it up from the drying line, it's barely wider than your hand, maybe 2 hands at most. Made of tightly woven linen, slightly stiff from washing with reed ash. You hold one end at your hip, wrap it around your waist twice, then draw the long tail between your legs and back up, tucking it into the front fold. It's not glamorous, and it's definitely not seamless, but it keeps things in place. Now you can walk briskly through the household without your underlayer shifting uncomfortably. You can kneel to scrub the floor, climb a ladder to retrieve figs from the rooftop, or if you're one of the rare few, ride a donkey without wondering if you're flashing half the city of Ur. But not everyone bothered. Many believe that loincloths were more common among men, laborers, soldiers, temple guards. Women's garments were longer draped and layered. If you were wearing a knee-length shift beneath a full outer robe, why add more fabric to an already sweat-prone zone? Still, there's the mystery of that one famous tablet, the letter to Ionisir's wife, that some scholars point to as evidence. The letter, while mostly a trade complaint about copper quality, includes a bizarre aside and tell your wife to stop wearing her understrings like a dancing girl. Was it a joke? A moral rebuke? A fashion critique? No one knows. But the implication lingers some women may have worn understrings, likely loincloths, in a way considered inappropriate or scandalously stylish. And as we all know, if it causes a stir in writing, someone was probably doing it. Back in your courtyard, your neighbor pops her head over the wall. Hot already, she sighs. Too hot for layering you. Reply, tugging slightly at your sash, adjusting the underlayer so it clings just a little less. She grins. Wore the short one today. Scandalous. You both laugh. Scandalous in this context means slightly above the ankle. It's a reminder that clothing even underneath was always a conversation. What you wore sent signals. Maybe it was a flash of the sash at your hip. Maybe it was how high your hemline rose when you knelt. Maybe it was the visible line of a linen strip beneath a light robe. Small details, fleeting but meaningful in a culture where gesture and fabric often spoke louder than words. There's also a practical note. Some women, especially priestesses, may have worn special undergarments during rituals. These could include loincloths made from ritual purified linen, tied in specific ways and removed only during bathing or sacrifice. Some theories even suggest that menstruating women had specific wraps or pads made from moss-lined linen, although direct evidence for this is scarce and scholarly opinions vary wildly. One text references the red cloth of Ishtar's daughters, but whether that's literal poetic or just bad metaphor is still up for debate. The fringe view held by only the boldest of academics is that some elite women wore nothing underneath at all. Not out of rebellion, but because linen was expensive, layering was hot, and modesty norms were simply different. In a time before tight seams and private bedrooms, perhaps your privacy was more about ritual and behavior than the precise inches of cloth on your skin. So here you are, standing by the door, half-dressed in the ancient sense. The breeze from the alley sneaks under the courtyard curtain and brushes your ankles. Your underlayer is in place, your sash tied, and your linen may be loincloth secured for good measure. You bend, stretch, sit, all movement tested and approved. It's not flashy, not even visible, but it gives you just enough comfort and coverage to carry out your day with grace and the quiet assurance that nothing's going to flap open at the wrong moment. And in a world without underwear ads or elastic waistbands, that's more than enough. The sky glows soft with late morning light, and you're perched on a smooth stone bench in the shade, absently twisting the corner of your linen sash while the city hums around you. The kitchen smells like warm dates and cumin, and somewhere down the lane a goat is protesting its existence with dramatic volume. But here in the calm of your private quarters, you're thinking about robes, specifically the elaborate layered ones worn by priestesses, and more importantly, what they wore underneath. Unlike everyday women, priestesses in ancient Mesopotamia had clothing regulations that were both ceremonial and symbolic. These weren't just women in fancy robes lighting incense, they were intermediaries with the divine. Their garments reflected that role layer by layer, stitch by stitch. And the underlayers. Oh, those were as meaningful as the outermost embroidered panels. Your friend Ninsaba recently entered the service of the goddess Inanna. She tells you everything: the initiation rituals, the strict diet, the long hours copying sacred texts onto wax tablets. But what fascinated you most were the clothes. According to temple tradition, the inner garment of a priestess had to be pure linen, washed, perfumed, and stored in cedar wood chests to prevent contamination from everyday life. Before donning it, she had to perform ablutions, anoint herself with scented oils, and recite a short chant about divine humility. The shift itself. Loosely cut tied at the side, sometimes dyed with plant pigments in pale shades of ochre or lavender, though records disagree on how widespread color use actually was. Some rituals even required underlayers to be woven on special looms, touched only by virgins or elderly women. Does that sound excessive? Sure. But when you're stepping into a temple built to honor gods who turn people into salt pillars when offended, you probably don't want to risk showing up in yesterday's laundry. There's a charming but peculiar tablet from Sippar describing a linen of the moon used only during lunar rites. Historians still argue whether this was metaphorical, referring to a smooth white weave, or literal, maybe even dyed with rare minerals to shimmer in moonlight. One fringe theory suggests it was worn underneath a semi-transparent outer robe to create a layered glow effect during nighttime rituals. A very fancy flashlight outfit, if you will. And then there were pearls. Pearls, or rather shell beads resembling pearls, were sometimes stitched into the hems of these underlayers. Not to be seen, mind you. They were hidden inside folds or along waist seams believed to attract the goddess's attention or act as protective charms. One excavation even uncovered a tiny pearl-studded linen scrap beneath a collapsed temple wall, sparking theories that undergarments could be as ritually charged as altars or offerings. But what about the day-to-day? Well, when not performing rites, priestesses often wore practical undyed linen underlayers like everyone else, though likely better made and maintained by a small army of temple servants. There's an amusing clay tablet from Nippur's temple archives that includes an itemized linen inventory. Among the outer robes and ceremonial belts, there's one line that reads simply, 7 base layers for Nungal's service, one with small oil mark discarded. Scholars speculate this was a polite way of saying someone spilled perfume down the front, which, let's be honest, still happens today. There's also the matter of posture. Many temple rituals required priestesses to kneel, stand, bow, or sit cross-legged for long periods. Their underlayers had to accommodate this no pinching seams, no stiff hems. Some shifts were cut wider at the hips or gusseted between the thighs for easier movement. It's a small thing, but try sitting in prayer for 6 hours straight while wearing a tight, chafing linen wrap. It makes you a lot more understanding of tailoring choices both ancient and modern. Back in your courtyard, you adjust your own underlayer thoughtfully. No pearls sewn in no divine shimmer, but still it has meaning. You recall how your mother folded it after washing carefully, smoothing the seams, muttering under her breath about how a crooked hem brings bad luck. You were 6 watching wide-eyed, absorbing rituals, not from stone tablets, but from her hands. You fold your arms and lean back against the wall. The linen shifts slightly with you cool where it touches your skin, warm where the sun reaches. You imagine the women who wore layers like this not just to stay modest, but to connect with something beyond daily life. In a world where gods could be petty priests, powerful, and the weather unrelenting, maybe a clean linen shift wasn't just clothing, it was protection. A second skin of ritual and reassurance. You pause breathing in the mingled scent of dust oil and the faintest trace of incense from a distant rooftop shrine. The world feels both far away and right here. Just as you're about to stand, you notice a little bundle tucked beneath your bench, a tiny wrapped linen square embroidered with a temple star symbol at the corner. One of the children must have left it during play, or maybe it belonged to Ninsaba and she dropped it while hurrying to morning chant. You smile, picking it up. The cloth is finely made, barely fraying at the edge. And though it's just a small underlayer scrap forgotten and crumpled, you hold it with care. Because here, even what's hidden beneath holds stories. The courtyard has quieted now. The bustle of early chores has faded into the slower rhythm of mid-morning, and you sit cross-legged on a woven mat in the shadow of your house's wall, a bowl of water beside you, and a folded piece of linen across your knees. You're not here to mend or to fold. You're thinking about something a little more, well, structural. Your underlayer covers your body. But what about support? Tonight we're exploring a surprisingly debated topic. Did Mesopotamian women bind their breasts, or did they simply let nature do its thing under all that linen? On the surface, it's a simple question. But dig a little deeper into art tablets and fragments of linen uncovered from tombs, and suddenly you find yourself tangled in scholarly debate, conflicting theories, and a complete absence of elastic. Let's start with the breastband. Some historians propose that women wore a kind of chest cloth, essentially a narrow strip of linen wound snugly around the torso binding the breasts. Think of it as the ancient precursor to a bandeau bra, only without lycra hooks or helpful size charts. It may have been tied behind the back or knotted under the bust with loose ends tucked neatly to avoid visible lumps under robes. The theory gains traction from a few figurines, particularly from the early dynastic period, showing women with visibly flattened torsos beneath their clothing. Could this indicate chest binding? Possibly. Or could it simply reflect a stylized artistic choice to depict modesty or idealized body proportions? Also possible. In fact, historians still argue whether these representations are literal symbolic or simply the artist's attempt to avoid carving curves out of brittle clay. Still, some textual references may support the idea. A late Babylonian ritual tablet mentions a band of silence worn by priestesses during a fertility rite. While poetic in name, some scholars believe this band was a physical strip of cloth worn across the chest to symbolize modesty and self-restraint. Others say it was metaphorical, like a vow of silence, the truth wrapped up in linen and left to interpretation. Now let's imagine you're one of the women who did wear a breastband. How would you put it on? First, you take a long, narrow strip of cloth. Perhaps a third the width of your underlayer sash, but much longer. Starting under one arm, you'd wrap it horizontally around your chest, pulling snug as you go. Not too tight, you still need to breathe and lift amphorae without blacking out. The final wrap would be tucked or pinned at the back. No modern fasteners here, just clever knots and friction. The goal wasn't cleavage. It wasn't even support in the way we think of braias today. Instead, it was control, modesty. Streamlining the figure beneath a tunic, especially if you plan to move bow or dance without your chest launching its own side quest. But the counter-argument, many believe that Mesopotamian women did not in fact bind their breasts at all. The climate was too hot, the materials too rough, and the garments already loose enough to allow for natural movement without discomfort. Why bind what's already hidden beneath layers of flowing linen? And remember, clothing often followed social expectations. Modesty might have been more about behavior than coverage. A woman's dignity came through how she moved, spoke, and carried herself, not just how tightly she swaddled her torso. You shift slightly on the mat and feel your own underlayer settle back into place. The linen grazes your shoulders, cool textured, whisper light. You imagine going without the breastband. There's a freedom to it, a softness. It's the kind of choice you might make on a hot festival day or when working alone in the garden. But if you're heading to a formal gathering, maybe you tie the band back on just to feel polished, composed, held. There's also regional variation to consider. In cities like Ur and Uruk, fashion leaned more toward ornate outerwear, one-shoulder robes, layered sashes, jewel-accented tunics. In such places, the undergarments might have been functional, but unseen, less about visibility and more about practicality. But in temples of Nippur or the royal households of Babylon, where ritual precision reigned, your underlayers could be a canvas for status and symbolic purity. In those settings, a breastband could be as much a statement as a sandal strap or anklet bell. Now here's a quirky tidbit. In some temple records, there's mention of three-banded linen. No one knows exactly what it was. Was it a special wrap for the chest-stitched layering pattern, or a misunderstood translation of a triple-pleated shift? Scholars raise eyebrows. Linguists argue. Nothing is settled. But one theory, playful but not implausible, suggests this could refer to a tiered breast wrap with decorative stitching marking each fold. You reach for your own cloth band and try it on not too tight, just enough to feel the gentle pressure across your ribs. It's strange at first, like a hug from history, but then it becomes familiar, comforting. You wonder who else wore one like this, whether they felt the same quiet satisfaction at a well-tied knot, the same relief when it came off at night. As the sun shifts overhead, you unfurl the wrap, slowly folding it back with care. You may not know what every woman did or how exactly every ritual was performed, but you've felt something tonight, a closeness to the small decisions, the subtle comforts that shaped lives millennia ago. And sometimes that's all you need to feel connected. You lean back on your palms toes, stretched out in the dusty warmth of the courtyard, and a familiar flutter of linen settles around your legs. This shift, you've worn it since girlhood. Not the same one, of course. You've outgrown a dozen versions by now, but each one has followed the same rhythm, loose, modest, whisper thin, and stitched with care. Tonight, let's drift back into the world of childhood, coming of age, and the quiet transitions of Mesopotamian womanhood, layer by linen layer. In ancient Mesopotamia, clothing wasn't just about status or ritual. It marked the stages of life, especially for girls. As a toddler, your first garments were likely nothing at all. In hot summers, little children often roamed barefoot and bare-bottomed, darting between chickens and storage jars like tiny whirlwinds of mud and giggles. But once you hit age 4 or 5, the draping began. Your mother would fashion a simple wrap from leftover linen knotted loosely at the shoulder. It barely counted as a garment by modern standards, but it gave shape to your days, taught you the first tugs and folds of modesty. By the time you were 7 or 8, your underlayer started to resemble your mother's. Maybe it still smelled faintly of the oil lamp that scorched it last week. Maybe your name was stitched clumsily into the hem, your first attempt at embroidery crooked but proudly worn. The linen was coarse or reused from an older sibling or cousin, but it was yours. Puberty brought new rituals, new stitches. Some families held small ceremonies when girls reached maturity. Not grand feasts, just quiet acknowledgments with gifts of oil combs or fresh linen. A new underlayer would be presented crisp, undyed, possibly scented with juniper or almond. You remember yours clearly. You were 12. The fabric was scratchy at first, but it softened quickly with wear. Your aunt helped tie it, reminding you not to pull too tight. Leave room for breath, she said, and for growing ribs. It wasn't just about modesty anymore. It was preparation. A girl's underlayer began to signal readiness, not necessarily for marriage, but for new roles weaving apprentice grain measurer or junior scribe. Some girls joined temple service, their linen shifts marked with specific colored threads to show their station. Others stayed in the home learning to fold linens tighter, neater without creasing the corners. And when marriage came, it came with more linen. A bride's trousseau always included underlayers, sometimes a dozen if her family could afford it. They'd be stacked in clay jars or reed baskets rolled carefully to avoid folds, and presented alongside combs, salves, and jars of frankincense. The groom's family might inspect the linens, testing the weave with their fingers, gauging not just quality but care. A stain or uneven stitch could spark whispers: was she careless or simply poor? You remember your own wedding week. The heat was suffocating the air, heavy with anticipation and roasted goat. Your underlayers that week were freshly washed, sprinkled with ash, and dried overnight on the rooftop. On the morning of the ceremony, your mother laid one out in the shade and pressed a shell-shaped bead into the hem. For protection, she whispered. From evil eyes and in-laws. After the wedding, married life brought new layers, literally. As a wife, you wore slightly heavier linen underlayers, cut a little longer, stitched with more modest hems. If your new home was in a city like Lagash or Babylon, where neighbors peered with professional curiosity, your underlayers needed to behave. No slipping shoulder ties. No surprise gusts revealing ankle or worse. You adapted quickly, adding an extra sash here, a wrap there. You learned to dress faster than the toddler could spill date paste all over your shift. Motherhood, of course, changed everything. You remember your first pregnancy. The underlayers began to feel snug. So you sewed side slits, let the linen billow. After your son was born, your underlayer became a nursing smock, hiked strategically or loosened with clever tucks. You tied a small scrap of linen around your wrist to wipe his drool, then forgot it was there until evening. Later, with more children and more errands, you learned to layer for speed. One shift for comfort, one over it for decency. No time for fancy hems or stitched prayers anymore, but the habit lingered. Sometimes you still fingered the corners of your underlayer, absent-mindedly tracing invisible blessings. Some women wore their underlayers until they fell apart. Others repurposed them, cutting old shifts into rags, headbands, even baby wraps. One clever neighbor used hers to pad a clay pot used for storing lentils. Keeps them cool, she claimed, and less judgmental. And when you lost someone, a parent, a sister, a child, your underlayer changed again. Not always in color, but in shape. Simpler, looser, quieter. Some women added a black thread along the hem. Others simply wore the same shift for days unwashed, perfumed only with memory. And yet through all these transitions, childhood marriage, motherhood grief, one thing remained: the quiet presence of linen against your skin. Not flashy, not loud, but reliable. A whisper of softness in a world of clamor. You stretch now, feeling your current underlayer shift slightly with your movement. It's warm in the sun, cool in the shade, and it smells faintly of salt clay and something else, something like history. It fits differently these days, but it still fits. You're seated now beside a wide ceramic bowl filled with water that's been steeped in rose petals and cardamom. One hand trails lazily through the cool surface as a breeze flutters the edge of your underlayer. You've bathed, you've dried, but you're not dressing just yet. Because before any linen meets your skin, there is ritual. There is scent. There is the tender art of preparing the body, an act just as personal, just as sacred as the layers themselves. Let's talk about oil salves and the subtle power of perfumed skin in ancient Mesopotamia. You reach for a small jar beside the bowl. Its stopper is made of cork and beeswax. Its contents a slow blended mixture of crushed myrrh sesame oil and powdered cedar bark. You warm a dab between your palms, then press it gently onto your arms, your neck, your chest. Not to overwhelm, just to suggest. Scent was more than a pleasure here. It was cleanliness, protection, even prayer. The gods were believed to respond to sweet smells while evil spirits detested them, which meant that technically every morning routine was a miniature exorcism with almond oil and a pumice stone. Even before underlayers, this was the first clothing of the day, a veil of scent pressed into the skin. And not just scent, but texture. Some women preferred thick salves, especially in dry weather linseed, or date oils thickened with beeswax rubbed into elbows and knees until skin shone like burnished bronze. Others used clay paste to cool the body, then washed them off before dressing, leaving only a faint trace of sandalwood behind. Your grandmother used to say, "A woman who smells like grain and honey will never be alone." She wasn't wrong. This part of the ritual was deeply personal. Not everyone scented the same way. Not everyone could afford to either. While elite women had access to imported oils from far-off places like Dilmun and Elam, commoners often made do with what they had crushed herbs-cooled fat river clay. And still the result was often the same, a body prepared not just for comfort, but for respect. Here's a curious detail. There are surviving recipes scratched into clay tablets for skin salves and perfumes. One particularly famous one calls for 1 part myrrh, 1 part crushed fir sap, 2 parts warm oil to be aged in ceramic for 7 days and 3 moons. Did it work? Hard to say. Did it smell divine according to scholars who've recreated it? Yes, in a deeply forested, slightly spicy kind of way. And then there were exfoliants. Yes, Mesopotamian women exfoliated. Maybe not with loofahs and charcoal scrubs, but with pumice stones and fine river sand mixed with sesame oil. One fringe theory suggests that polishing the skin this way was seen as both a beauty treatment and a kind of spiritual buffing. Some temples even had dedicated ointment attendants whose role was to help prepare high-ranking women for rituals, massaging the body, applying oils, brushing out hair, and smoothing skin until it glowed. You smooth more oil along your legs now watching the sunlight catch on the sheen it leaves behind. It's not just aesthetic, it keeps the linen from sticking when the day grows hot. And it makes slipping into your underlayer feel like brushing against a memory. Soft, familiar, almost luxurious. And don't forget the powder touches. Before dressing, some women dusted their skin with finely ground herb sage saffron or dried rose petals. Not in clouds like modern talcum powder, but in light sweeps with cloth bundles or feather fans. It helped absorb sweat. It masked other smells. It felt like being kissed by flowers. Even the underlayer itself sometimes carried scent. Women would tuck sachets, little linen bundles filled with dried lavender or crushed thyme into the folds of their garments. Others stored their linen in wooden chests packed with aromatic bark. One high-status tomb revealed a cedar-lined linen basket filled with underlayers that still, even after millennia, retained a faint trace of resin and rose oil. Imagine that scent surviving the centuries, whispering its way back through time. Of course, not everyone enjoyed all this. There were always the skeptics, the aunties who muttered that too much oil made you smell like a temple dancer, or that real women didn't waste cumin on their thighs. One famous proverb reads, "She who oils her neck forgets her chores." You've never quite agreed with it. But you think about it anyway every time you spend a few extra minutes massaging oil into your wrists. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some women, it said, anointed their underarms with vinegar and mint leaves, not just to cool down, but to ward off certain unseen forces. Whether those forces were evil spirits or teenage suitors remains unclear. You finish your routine now, fingers glossy and fragrant skin, cool to the touch. You reach for your linen underlayer and slip it over your head. It catches slightly on your shoulders, then falls into place like water. The cloth glides easily, now helped along by the oils. No sticking, no tugging, just softness. As the fabric settles against your skin, you realize something: this isn't just preparation, it's preservation. A daily ritual, not of vanity, but of dignity. In a world of sharp edges and loud voices, there's something revolutionary in smoothing a fragrant oil across your collarbone. You reach for your sash, slowly wrapping and tying it. Your underlayer is in place. Your skin sings quietly beneath it, kissed by cardamom and memory. And somewhere, perhaps a goddess breathes in your scent and nods in approval. You step out of the shaded courtyard and into the full blaze of midday. The sun hangs high above the rooftops, bouncing off the pale mud brick and making the world shimmer with heat. The stone path beneath your feet is warm but not unbearable yet, just enough to remind you why today's underlayer needed to be light, loose, and very breathable. Because here's the thing about living in Mesopotamia: it's hot. And not just open a window hot. It's melt the goat butter, dry the laundry before you blink, soak through your sash in 10 steps. Kind of hot. Which means tonight we're sweating into the practical side of fashion, how women stayed cool in triple-digit heat while still fully clothed. Let's just say linen was doing the most. The underlayer, as always, was the key player. Made from finely woven flax fibers, it allowed air to move freely between your skin and the layers above. Think of it as ancient climate control, a soft, breathable base that absorbed moisture and helped your outer robe stay just a little bit less swampy. Some women swore by single-layer shifts on the hottest days, tying them looser than usual, leaving the neckline slightly lower, not scandalous, just sensible. Others used 2 layers of very thin linen, one close to the skin, the second, acting almost like a wicking shield. The result: more airflow, less sticking flow. And then there was positioning. You'd wake early before the sun had even cleared the rooftops to get dressed. Why? Because getting into a layered outfit while already sweaty is a kind of punishment no one deserves. By dressing early, you gave yourself the best shot at feeling cool for at least the first few hours of the day. And maybe you could stretch that feeling until lunch. Some women even pre-cooled their underlayers. Yes, really. You dip the linen shift into clean water at dawn, wring it out until damp but not dripping, and wear it as you moved about your chores. It evaporated quickly in the heat, pulling warmth from your body as it dried. And if you had the luxury, you might scent the water first with rose or lemongrass to make the process slightly more pleasant. Not a bad DIY spa treatment for 2000 BCE. Another trick: going barefoot. While sandals were standard, many women removed them once indoors, letting the cooler floor surface regulate their body temperature from the ground up. It was also believed that walking barefoot on clay helped return fire to the earth. Whether or not that's scientifically sound, it certainly feels poetic. You pause near a sunlit wall now, your underlayer clinging slightly at the small of your back. It's already beginning that sticky shift from comfortable to clammy. But here's the trick: you tied your sash just a little lower today, allowing the linen to tent outward as you walk. Air moves, fabric breathes, you survive. And don't underestimate shade. Homes were designed for it: narrow windows, thick walls, shaded courtyards. Women often stayed indoors during the hottest part of the day, not out of submission, but strategy. No one wants to debate dowry terms when their underlayer is becoming a personal sauna. Still, sometimes you had to be out. Maybe it's a market day. Maybe you're overseeing a delivery of wool bundles or meeting a cousin for a rooftop lunch. In those cases, you might tuck a damp cloth under your sash or carry a parasol made from reeds and goat hide. Was it stylish? Not exactly, but practical always. Here's a quirky tip passed down from older women: if you rub a little oil behind your knees, and at the bend of your elbows, your underlayer won't stick as much. Does it work? Mostly. Does it smell like a salad on hot days a little? But it's better than peeling linen off your legs like a second skin after a 3-hour walk to the temple. Now, there's also a theory, admittedly not universally accepted, that some elite women wore mesh-like linen during the hottest months. Not mesh like a basketball jersey, mind you, but extra loose weave fabric that created tiny ventilation holes. Historians still argue whether this was practical innovation or luxury gone overboard. After all, someone had to sit and weave all those barely there threads. Imagine the eye strain. Some women opted for darker linen in the summer, not because it stayed cooler, spoiler, it didn't, but because it hid sweat better. The downside, it heated up faster under the sun. A classic trade-off. But fashion has always been a compromise between comfort and confidence, even if your confidence is mostly directed at the fig vendor. Back at home, you step inside, grateful for the shade. You lift your shift slightly, letting the breeze from the courtyard opening wash over your knees. The sweat cools as it dries. You sigh, not in discomfort, but in relief. You've made it through the worst heat of the day, and as you sit back, sip from a cool clay cup of tamarind water, you're grateful for every thoughtful fold, every strategic stitch in your underlayer. Because surviving the Mesopotamian summer isn't about suffering, it's about smart fabric and smarter women. You smooth the linen over your thighs, noting the way it sticks just a little less than it used to, thanks to today's extra dash of mint oil. See, you're adapting. And tomorrow you'll do it all again with the same cloth, the same knots, the same quiet mastery of staying cool beneath the heat of a blazing ancient sun. The sun is beginning to shift, leaning toward afternoon now, and with it comes the quiet clinking of pots and the soft splash of water from neighboring homes. It's laundry time in the city of Ur, one of the oldest cities on Earth. And yet here you are, ankle deep in sudsy water, slapping wet linen against a flat stone with all the grace of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. Because tonight we're entering the most thankless and most essential part of Mesopotamian fashion, washing your underlayers. Let's be honest, linen may be breathable and lovely on the skin, but it's also a magnet for dust, oil, sweat, and the occasional fig stain. And in an age without detergent, bleach, or spin cycles, keeping it clean took effort. Real finger-wrinkling, back-aching effort. So there you are, sleeves rolled up, standing beside a basin, carved into the ground, filled with water hauled from the canal before sunrise. Your washing mixture. A lumpy concoction of crushed reeds, fine ash, and perhaps if you're feeling fancy, a splash of vinegar. Suds don't really happen. Not like modern soap, but it works. The ash binds with oils. The reed mash scrubs the fibers. Your hands do the rest. You scrub. You wring. You slap the linen flat against the stone. Not in frustration, well, sometimes, but because the repetitive motion helps work out dirt and stretch the fabric smooth. Around you, other women are doing the same. Mothers, daughters, servants, all bonded in this semi-sacred ritual of suds and gossip. Yes, gossip. Laundry time was never just about getting clothes clean. It was the social hour of the day. You trade news about who saw whose husband in the market with someone else's cousin. You learn which daughter is being courted, which temple singer is rumored to be pregnant, and which merchant's wife, brace yourself, burned 2 underlayers on the cook fire last week. It's hot, it's humid, it's noisy, but the laughter cuts through it, and amid the work, there's care. Each underlayer is inspected like a treasured possession. You know your own garments by heart, the familiar stitching at the collar, the slight thinning at the elbows. One piece has a tiny patch sewn by your daughter, her first attempt at a tidy square. Another bears a pinkish stain you never could explain. Maybe pomegranate juice. Maybe not. It's become part of the fabric now, a soft echo of a day long past. Rinsing is a whole process. You swirl the linen in a clean basin, wring it out carefully, too much twisting, and the fibers break, and then drape it over long ropes strung across the courtyard or between the fig trees. The sun will do the rest, and oh, how quickly it does. Within an hour, the fabric is warm, dry, and smells faintly of ash and wind. Now, here's a fringe theory that sparks frequent debates. Some scholars believe that elite women didn't do their own laundry at all. Instead, temple attendants or household slaves managed the process. And in high-ranking homes, there may have been designated linen specialist women trained not only in washing, but in mending and scenting underlayers with specific herbal blends. Is there hard evidence? Not exactly, but a few cuneiform tablets from palace archives do mention linen keepers and wardrobe stewards, suggesting that at least among the wealthiest, someone was definitely not soaking reed ash into their fingernails every week. You, however, are not that elite today, and so you're back at it rinsing one last tunic. You lift it, shake it out, and hold it to the sun. The light filters through, illuminating the weave so fine it almost glows. You pause, fingers tracing the edge. There's a small hole forming at the shoulder. You'll mend it tonight sitting cross-legged with your needle case and a cup of sweet beer, probably listening to your neighbor's daughter recite a half-remembered poem about Enaduana and moonlight. You add the tunic to the drying line and step back. A row of underlayers flutters gently above your head, like pale sails waiting for wind. You smile. There's something satisfying about seeing your work float like that. Something deeply human in this repetitive, ancient rhythm. Of course there are tricks. Some women brush clay onto the heaviest soiled linen and let it dry in the sun before washing. Others soak garments overnight in vinegar to help soften and disinfect. And a few, let's be honest, they might be wizards manage to keep their linen shifts white as moonlight, despite clay dust, goat hair, and toddlers. You've tried every trick in the book. Some work. Others are mostly wishful thinking. But in the end, your linen is clean enough, scented enough, yours enough. And when night falls and you slip one of these underlayers over your oiled, tired skin, it feels like a hug from a past version of yourself, one who worked, laughed, rinsed, and hoped to wake with soft, dry cloth against her shoulders. The sun lowers now, casting golden shadows over the courtyard. Your laundry flutters. Your hands smell of ash and lavender, and you feel strangely peaceful. Because even in the oldest city on earth, even without detergent or dryers, even without Instagram laundry folding videos, there is beauty in clean linen. And even more in the hands that cleaned it. The sun has finally begun its descent, slanting through the narrow alleyways and bathing the city in that dusty golden light that makes everything, even drying laundry, look poetic. You lean against a doorway, arms crossed loosely, watching your linen underlayers sway like tired dancers in the breeze. But tonight your attention drifts downward past the hems and ties to the edges of modesty, your feet, your sandals, and the surprisingly expressive world of ankles. Because in ancient Mesopotamia, even below the knees had a story to tell. So let's talk about sandal straps and anklet gossip. At first glance, it might seem like a stretch. Surely all the real drama happened in temples and palace halls, right? But you'd be surprised how much meaning could be tied quite literally into something as simple as a leather thong around your ankle. Picture this. You're stepping out into the street underlayer, freshly washed outer robe draped just so. But the detail that turns heads, the fine twist of gold-threaded cord peeking out where your robe sways, not your earrings, not your belt. That shimmer near the ankle, that's how people know you've got style and maybe a husband with connections in Dillman. Sandals were more than just foot protection. They were a statement. A properly bound pair of sandals, whether made of palm fiber goat leather or linen cord, told people you were prepared, composed, and likely not in a rush. Sandals with mismatched straps or frayed ends that might spark whispers. She rushed this morning. Her maid's not careful. Trouble at home. Even barefootedness had nuance. In some city-states, temple rituals required women to enter holy spaces barefoot. In others, going without sandals in public marked you as impoverished or defiant. It all depended on context, but the real fun started with anklets. You adjust your underlayer now, bending slightly to untangle the edge from your sandal strap, and there it is, the faint jingle of a tiny bronze anklet. You wear it low hidden just enough to be personal, but loud enough to be noticed when you walk. It's not expensive, but it's meaningful, passed down from your mother, gifted on your wedding day, or bought for yourself after trading 20 lentil cakes at the market. Anklets were often made of metal, copper, bronze, sometimes silver if you were fancy, and occasionally strung with shell stones or even glass beads imported from long-distance trade. Some were closed loops, others tied with linen cord and tiny knots. Some jingled when you walked. Others stayed silent stealth anklets, if you will. One cylinder seal impression from Lagash shows a woman dancing with multiple anklets on one leg, each engraved with symbols scholars still can't fully decode. Were they family emblems, protective charms, passive-aggressive poetry? Historians still argue whether these ankle accessories were simply decorative or packed with cultural messages. Maybe both. There's a charming old tale, half myth, half local gossip about a noblewoman who wore mismatched anklets on purpose. One silver, one bronze. It drove her in-laws crazy. She's mocking us, they said. She's eccentric, others whispered. But the woman herself. She just smiled and walked on her left ankle, chiming louder than the right. Fashion rebellion. Bronze Age edition. But anklets weren't just for flair. Some were tied with amulets meant to protect against scorpions. Others had bells sewn into the inside, yes, the inside, so only the wearer could hear them. One priestess supposedly wore hers as a prayer reminder, 3 tiny chimes for the goddess each time she stepped. Whether this was spiritual dedication or just a highly choreographed walk is unclear, but it's undeniably poetic. You flex your foot now, twisting the strap of your sandal back into place. The leather is soft from wear molded to your arch. The knot at the ankle is a little loose, probably needs retightening before the evening errands. You pause to fix it, tugging gently at the ends. And as you do, you notice your neighbor's daughter skipping by her own underlayer a little too long. Her feet dusty, but adorned with 2 mismatched blue cords wrapped around each ankle. "Made them myself," she announces proudly. "For speed." You nod seriously. They look fast. Because ankle wear, even the simplest bits of it, could be playful. Younger girls often tied colored strings just for fun or wore shell fragments for luck. One popular custom among teenagers involved swapping anklets with friends, tokens of loyalty, affection, and low-stakes social drama. She gave me hers, then took it back. I wore it for 2 moons before it broke. What does that mean? Honestly, probably nothing, or maybe everything. Some even whispered that a certain type of anklet worn above the ankle bone instead of below was a sign of flirtation. A signal. An invitation. "Walk slow near the well," your friend once said with a wink. Let the copper catch the light. You never quite decided if she was joking. Back in your own courtyard, you slip your foot into your sandal again, adjusting the strap to sit just right. It holds firm. You stand smooth your underlayer and take a slow, deliberate step. Your anklet shifts with you, making the faintest sound, just enough to be known. Just enough to say, "I am here. I have walked this path before. And I do so in style." You head for the doorway, sandals tapping softly against stone. Modest in dress, sure, but your ankles just a little bit loud. You're in the back corner of the courtyard now, crouched over a wooden basin, hands deep in the final rinse of someone else's laundry. The linen is stiff and rough, not your own, and your arms ache from the repeated wringing, folding, lifting. This isn't your morning routine. This isn't your household. Because tonight you're not the noblewoman. You're the woman who works for the noblewoman. Welcome to the world of laundry slaves, the often invisible hands behind those carefully layered undergarments. It's easy to romanticize linen when it's yours. When it fits, your body smells like rose oil and dries gently in the shade. But someone had to scrub it. Someone had to carry the heavy amphory of water from the canal, crush the reed ash, and bend over those stone washboards until their fingernails were gone and their backs screamed for rest. You squeeze the water from a thick shift, your palms slipping slightly on the wet weave. It's expensive fabric, finer than anything you'll ever wear. The kind of linen reserved for a high-ranking woman who probably never thinks twice about the hands that keep her linen soft and white. In Mesopotamian cities, most large households employed slaves. Some war captives, others born into servitude to handle the endless cycle of laundry. They weren't always mistreated, but they were invisible. They rarely appear in tablets by name, but their presence is implied in every line linen washed, robes prepared, household garments delivered. Who did that work? These women. Your days are shaped by rhythm. Not hours on a clock, but folds in fabric. You know how many tunics fit into a basket? How long it takes for a shift to dry in cloudy weather? Which lady of the house insists on 2 rinses and which one can't smell the difference between barley soap and goat tallow anyway? You move with quiet precision because mistakes have consequences. A dropped tunic in the dust, a robe scorched near the fire, a misfolded sash left damp overnight. None of it earns you sympathy. Maybe a warning, maybe worse. So you memorize which items belong to whom. By touch alone, this one with the tiny embroidered spiral, this one with the stiff hem, where someone stitched too tightly. Sometimes when you're alone at night folding the day's work, you imagine wearing one of these shifts yourself. Just for a moment. Not forever. Just to feel what it's like to have cloth that fits your frame instead of being wrapped hastily in whatever is left over. Would it feel different? Would you even want to take it off? There's an odd intimacy in laundering underlayers. You come to know these women in a way their husbands, their children, maybe even their friends do not. You see the stains. You smell the oil blends. You patch the worn seams where fabric thins from repeated rubbing. You witness the aging of their bodies written into their clothing tightened hips, expanding waist, the sudden appearance of secret ties hidden along the side. There's a famous line from a court ledger, "The lady wears beauty. The servant wears the burden of her grace." You heard that once and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Maybe both. Of course not. All households are cruel. Some women share quiet kindnesses, an extra roll of bread, a splash of clean water, a scrap of perfumed oil. One noble woman once gave her laundress a broken anklet she no longer wanted. "Too small for me," she said with a shrug. You still wear it even though it pinches slightly at the ankle. And even in labor, there's a strange kind of satisfaction. There's something meditative about folding. You've folded more tunics than you can count, and you've perfected a method that makes the cloth stack like temple bricks. You hum softly as you work an old lullaby your mother taught you before she was sold to another household. The song has no words anymore, just sounds. But the rhythm remains. You finish rinsing the final garment, a shift with decorative stitching. So fine it almost looks like lace. You wring it carefully, smoothing the edges between your thumbs and hang it on the rope beside the others. The courtyard smells like wet cloth and wood smoke. The sunlight catches the linen just right, turning each piece into a glowing silhouette. You stretch your arms, sore but steady. Your work is invisible to most, but the fabric remembers. It holds your touch. It moves because of your effort. And when the noble woman slips it on tomorrow morning, fresh and soft and cool against her perfumed skin, she won't say your name, but you'll know. You'll always know. That quiet knowing, it's not nothing. You gather your tools, splash your face with leftover rinse water, and tie your own rough linen back around your waist. It clings. A little smells like ash and carries no embroidery, but it's yours, for now. Until tomorrow's laundry begins again. Night is settling deep now. The wind has cooled, carrying the scent of dust grain and smoke curling up from cooking fires long extinguished. You've wrapped yourself in a woven shawl, not out of need, it's still warm, but for the comfort of routine. But underneath it all, you're still wearing your shift. A bit itchy, a bit clingy from the long day. And tonight we're talking about something that seems counterintuitive at first, itchy underlayers. Yes, let's get into it. Why on earth would any woman, especially in the stifling Mesopotamian heat, voluntarily wear a woolen shift underneath her robes? Because as strange as it sounds, some women did exactly that. Let's begin with the basics. Linen was the gold standard for underlayers. It was cool, lightweight, breathable, and most importantly, readily available near rivers where flax could thrive. But wool had its own place in Mesopotamian culture. It was plentiful, it was sacred, and sometimes it was unavoidable. You tug slightly at the edge of your linen shift, now grateful for its softness. But you remember the one winter you wore a woolen base layer after an early freeze hit the countryside. It was coarse, it scratched, and yet it worked. Warmth trumped comfort that season. You weren't alone. Some women wore woolen shifts during colder months, especially in higher elevation cities like Assur or along the fringes of the Zagros Mountains. Thick wool worn underneath lighter robes could keep you warm at dawn and still insulate when the day grew unexpectedly warm. But here's where it gets curious. Even in the heat, wool found its way back into the wardrobe, especially among priestesses and temple workers. One theory, wool carried ritual weight. It was the fabric of sacrifice of divine offerings of temple ceremonies. While not as comfortable against the skin, wool may have been used for certain undergarments because of its symbolic purity or its association with specific gods. Some rituals explicitly required unwashed wool to be worn next to the body itch, and all as a form of penance or purification. Historians still argue whether this was widespread or isolated to specific cult practices. Some say it was never meant for everyday wear. Others argue that women from wealthier families wore blended underlayers, linen on the inside with wool panels, stitched into the structure for warmth or status. There's even a theory that some garments used lightly felted wool that had been softened by years of washing, making it tolerable as a liner. You reach over to the edge of your sewing basket and pick up a small square of wool cloth, a leftover scrap from the last time you attempted to make a winter undershift. The stitching isn't bad, but the texture still coarse, still unforgiving. You rub it between your fingers and imagine the countless women who endured that against their skin. Out of duty, out of necessity, out of tradition. There's a kind of silent toughness in that choice. But there's another reason some women may have worn woolen underlayers, insect deterrents. Yes, you heard right. Certain types of wool, especially when treated with ash or natural oils, were believed to repel insects better than linen. In marshy towns near the rivers or swampy canals, this could make all the difference between a day of quiet dignity and one of itchy torment caused by buzzing, biting, microscopic pests. Better to scratch from the cloth than from bugs, apparently. One cuneiform fragment even mentions a temple cleaner who wore wool undercloth against the biting things. The ambiguity there is both hilarious and tragic. We've all had days like that, and yet women still found ways to make it bearable. Some lined their woolen shifts with scraps of softened linen at the neckline and armpits anywhere the friction would be greatest. Others added extra oil to their morning routine, coating their skin to create a barrier between flesh and fiber. Did it make it slippery? Sure, did it keep the wool from scraping your collarbone raw? Absolutely. There's also the cultural angle. In some communities, wool was associated with strength and resilience. A woman who wore a woolen underlayer might be considered tough, more industrious, more dedicated, more pious. In fact, a popular proverb etched into a clay tablet reads, "The woman who weaves her own wool suffers once. The woman who wears linen suffers twice." Interpret that however you wish. One story passed around in the sewing circle tells of a newlywed bride who insisted on wearing a woolen shift under her wedding robes, despite the summer heat. "To show I am no delicate flower," she reportedly said. She fainted halfway through the banquet. Still, the gesture was remembered with a mixture of admiration and amusement. And now, lying on your mat, the idea of willingly choosing itchy cloth seems ludicrous. But the truth is, every fiber told a story of status, of ritual, of personal choice. Even the ones that scratched. You curl onto your side, your own linen shift sticking slightly at the hip, but still softer than most. Your thumb finds a spot on the hem where the stitching is coming loose. You'll mend it tomorrow, and for now you're grateful for flax for fingers that stitched with care, and for the fact that you're not at this very moment trying to fall asleep wrapped in ceremonial wool. You roll onto your back now, your linen shift tugging slightly across your shoulders, and blink slowly at the wooden beams above your head. The night is deep. A lull has settled over the city like a warm blanket pierced only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the far-off creak of a cartwheel turned too late. The world is resting. But here in your quiet room, your thoughts drift to cloth. Not just the kind you wear, but the kind that even statues wore. Because tonight we're visiting a strange, shimmering intersection of the divine and the domestic, how dressing the gods shaped how women dress themselves. It starts in the temple. You've been there before stepping into the cool stone corridors of a shrine, the scent of incense thick in the air, your feet echoing softly on polished clay floors. In the inner sanctum, lit only by flickering oil lamps, stands the statue of a god or goddess, Nana Shamash Ishtar Nana, each more elaborate than the last, and beneath all the gold and lapis layers. Not just decorative drapery for show, real thoughtfully made underlayers, linen shifts tied with red cords, robes stitched with fine symbolic embroidery. Even the gods, it seems, did not go commando. Temple attendants, mostly women, were assigned to the daily care of these divine figures. That included bathing the statues, oiling them, and dressing them in ceremonial garments. A goddess didn't just get dusted off and propped on a pedestal. She was clothed every day with the same care a noblewoman might receive on her wedding morning. And here's where it gets fascinating. The underlayers used for these statues often mirrored what high-status women wore themselves. If Inanna wore a 3-layer robe with a linen base, you'd better believe her priestesses did the same. Not out of vanity, but out of respect. The divine body was the model, the gold standard. What adorned the goddess set the trend, not what was paraded in palace courtyards. You remember a tale your aunt once told. How a young girl newly inducted into temple service was asked to weave a ceremonial underlayer for the statue of Nana. She wove for days pure flax fine stitchwork prayers, whispered with every row. But when the robe was completed, it was too long. Her face flushed with shame. The priestess in charge said nothing, simply cut the bottom and used the excess to make a matching sash. That girl, she later became head weaver of the temple. Her mistake became a fashion innovation. It's not just the clothing itself, but what it symbolized. The gods' underlayers were layered with meaning, modesty, purity, transformation. To clothe a deity was to acknowledge their power and vulnerability. And to mimic that process in your own dressing routine was to bring yourself closer to the divine. When you tied your sash in the same knot used for Inanna's robes, you weren't just getting dressed. You were participating in myth. There's a record from Uruk describing the undergarments of the moon's bride, a poetic name for the robe worn by the goddess statue during seasonal ceremonies. The garment was described as woven with starlight, which scholars believe referred to silver-dyed thread or possibly mica powder dusted over the fabric. That same style silvery thread in the hems suddenly became popular among temple women. Coincidence unlikely. Even the gods had seasonal wardrobe shifts. Statues were redressed according to the calendar. Winter layers included heavier woolen shifts, while spring brought lighter linens, sometimes perfumed with herbs associated with fertility. There are entire inventories listing these garments. 2 underrobes of bleached flax, 1 shift of saffron, threaded weave a belt of 7 knots to bind the veil. The care put into these underlayers, never seen by worshippers, shows just how important they were. And women noticed. They copied the knotting techniques. They borrowed the embroidery patterns. They infused their own underlayers with similar ritual attention. Even if you weren't a priestess, you might mimic temple garments during holy days, tying your linen just so wearing your amulet in the exact place where Ishtar's was said to hang. Some women even stitched prayers into the seams of their underlayers, not for others to see, but as a kind of divine insulation. A hidden link between body and spirit. May Inanna walk with me, one hem reads. May Ninhursag cool the fire of my skin, reads another. Historians debate whether this was purely religious or also fashionable. The likely answer, it was both. Because when the divine gets dressed, everyone pays attention. And this divine mimicry didn't stop at shifts. Some temples had dedicated storage spaces for divine undergarments. Tiny chests lined with cedar containing carefully folded robes for specific days. When these items wore thin, they weren't thrown away. They were buried, returned to the earth, as one priestess wrote. You wonder now, as you finger the edge of your own linen, how many layers you've buried over the years. Not ceremonially maybe, but folded one last time and offered to the fire, the garden, the canal. Softly retired, remembered in scent and feel, if not in clay tablet. You adjust your blanket shift beneath your now cool underlayer and smile faintly at the idea of a goddess tugging at an itchy seam or struggling with a crooked sash. Unlikely, sure, but somehow comforting. Because whether divine or dusty, a body is a body. And even gods, it seems, appreciate a well-made shift. You're awake, but only barely now, somewhere between dreaming and dozing, lying on your side with your shift bunched at the hip, your hand tucked beneath your cheek. The room has gone still, the kind of still that only appears when the lamps have long since burned out, and even the most talkative neighbors have finally gone quiet. But in your mind, you're still wandering. Back through time, back through fabric. Tonight you find yourself thinking not of robes or shifts, but of something smaller, hidden, intimate, mysterious. Let's step into the delicate world of tassels, ties, and textile charms, the quiet magic sewn into the layers beneath it all. You stretch slightly and the hem of your shift tickles your ankle. You remember there's a tassel there. Not decorative. Not exactly, but meaningful. A braided cord with tiny knots tied in threes. Your aunt made it for you the day you first bled to keep your heart steady, she said. You never questioned it. You just stitched it into place low and to the left, where only you would ever feel it. This was common. Women of ancient Mesopotamia often wove small talismans into the seams of their underlayers. Tiny pouches filled with herbs. Knotted strings dyed with crushed berries. Even teeth, yes, small animal teeth, usually from a dog or sheep, worn not to frighten but to protect. You might think of it as superstition. But when a woman wears the same shift every day through joy and illness, birth, and prayer, a charm in the hem feels less like magic and more like reinforcement. You shift again your fingers, brushing along your side where another thread lives, this one stitched inside the sash line. Its red almost faded now. Your mother tied it when you were pregnant with your first child. To hold the belly, she whispered, although she meant more than the body. Sometimes these charms were obvious. A blue bead at the neckline, a carved bit of shell tucked at the collar. But more often they were secret, because a visible charm could be questioned, a hidden one that was yours alone, yours to pray into, yours to believe in. The practice wasn't limited to women, of course, but women were the artist of it. The quiet priests of daily protection, a stitch here to ward off nightmares, a knot there to bring back a missing lover. One old tablet even mentions a shift sewn with 7 twists of longing. Scholars think it was a poetic term for fertility charms, or maybe a euphemism. Hard to tell in a language where love and barley sometimes share metaphors. You recall a market stall from your childhood run by a woman with gold-ringed fingers and a table full of charms? She sold sleeve knots for strength and belly stitches for protection. Your mother bought 3 strands of twisted wool bound with wax. You didn't know where she sewed it. You only knew she touched it when she was worried. Not all charms were things. Some were patterns. A double zigzag embroidered into the hem. A triangle hidden in the underarm gusset. Even the spacing of the stitches could carry meaning. 3 long, 1 short. A prayer for rest. 5 knots spaced evenly around the waistline. A wish for safe travels. Women whispered meanings to each other. No book recorded them. Only fingers and thread remembered. Some priestesses believed certain colors attracted or repelled divine attention. White for purity, blue for protection, yellow for warmth, sometimes fertility. Red was especially potent, used sparingly, stitched carefully. It could invite blessings, or draw too much notice from jealous gods if overused. Balance, always balance. You reach up now, fingers tracing a tiny bump just beneath your collarbone, the knot you tied 2 years ago, after that long illness passed. A charm of your own. No spell, no formal blessing, just linen and hope. And still it's here, holding, fading, protecting. Historians call these things folk practices, but to the women who lived them, they were simply part of the cloth. A shift without a charm felt naked, unprepared, like stepping into the day without combing your hair or touching the ground with your toes first. Even laundering was done with care. Women would remove charms before washing, then re-sew them after. Some were too fragile for reed ash and sun. Others had to be replaced entirely new knots for new phases of life. It was common to see women at dusk squinting in the fading light as they reattached a sachet or rewove a thread that had frayed at the edge. And when a shift wore out, when the cloth grew thin and transparent, the charms were the last part removed. Plucked carefully, reused if still strong, buried if not. Retired, they'd say, as if the linen had served a good life. Which, honestly, it had. You close your eyes now, your body sinking deeper into the stillness, your underlayer warm against your skin. Somewhere inside, its hem a charm remains, a frayed thread, a knotted hope. You haven't touched it in weeks, maybe months, but you know it's there, and that's the point. In a world of shifting sands and unpredictable winds, sometimes the smallest, quietest knots are the ones that hold us together. The night air is cooler now, brushing over your skin like a soft cloth soaked in twilight. Your shift clings in a few places at the small of your back, behind your knees, but mostly it feels like a second skin. Familiar, safe, a barrier between you and the unknown. And yet, was it always linen? Tonight we drift into stranger territory, down a lesser-walked path of textile speculation. Because while linen and wool ruled the wardrobes of ancient Mesopotamia, there are whispers, just whispers, of a curious possibility. Did elite women wear something like silk? Before silk? No, not the shiny threads from China. Those wouldn't reach Mesopotamia for centuries. But scholars have uncovered references in obscure texts to a rare, luxuriously smooth fabric worn by high-ranking women. It was described not as linen nor wool, but as something softer, finer, and gleaming like beetle shell. Strange, right? One tablet fragment, broken, water-damaged, refers to garments of glimmer gifted to the wife of a king. Another mentions shifts of sky thread said to flutter without weight and stick to the skin like dew. Poetic exaggeration. Possibly, or maybe not. One theory suggests that these garments were made from beetle byproduct. Yes, beetles. Specifically the coccus beetle, which produces a resinous substance with a glossy finish. It's not quite silk, not even close. But some believe that ancient Mesopotamians may have experimented with beetle shells, fish skin, or ultra-fine bast fibers to create shimmering underlayers for royalty clothes that reflected lamplight and felt almost unreal to the touch. Do we have proof? Not really. Just faint clues. A few preserved textile samples with unusually fine thread count. A letter mentioning a robe soft as sunrise and costly as wine. A cylinder seal showing a woman surrounded by winged beetles, her tunic glittering beneath a stylized moon. You imagine it now slipping into a shift that rustles like flower petals clinging lightly to oiled skin, shining faintly beneath a sheer outer robe. Not something you'd wear while hauling jugs or baking barley cakes, but for a temple feast. A royal procession, a private meeting with a visiting envoy, perhaps. But these fabrics weren't just luxuries, they were power plays. To wear such a garment was to declare yourself untouchable, otherworldly. No one sweats in beetle fiber tunics after all. You don't climb ladders in them, you glide, you float. And with this textile came rules. The shift must not be worn more than once before airing. It must not touch coarse wool. It must not be exposed to ash clay or animal fat. In short, it was impractical. But then, so are most things designed to dazzle. You wonder now whether some of these garments were less about daily wear and more about transformation, like a costume for ritual, a mask made of thread. Maybe a woman donned her shimmer shift not to impress others, but to become someone else for a night. A goddess, a dream, a story told in soft thread, soft. Of course, there's always skepticism. Many historians argue that these references were metaphorical. Skythread may have simply been a particularly fine linen, bleached and beaten to silky smoothness. Glimmering robes could have been dusted with mica or decorated with tiny metal discs. There's no hard evidence of beetle fiber garments, just layered suggestion and a few truly confused scribes. Still, you like the idea. You like imagining that someone somewhere in a high-walled house wore something completely different from the rest of the city. That under her formal robe she carried a second skin, made not from flax or sheep, but from the patient labor of beetles and the imagination of spinners with too much time and too many moonlit ideas. And who's to say she didn't? Clothing has always been both utility and illusion. Underlayers especially. They're the garments closest to truth-touching skin, absorbing heat, gathering scent, but also the most easily hidden, altered, forgotten. The perfect canvas for innovation or reinvention. You turn on your mat, now shift rustling faintly in the dark, and wonder what would it feel like to sleep wrapped in beetle silk. Would it breathe like linen? Would it whisper like wool? Or would it crackle, shine, hold its shape even as you moved like a dream you can't quite fold? Either way, it reminds you, even in the quietest corners of clothing history, even in the linings and layers no one sees, there's room for wonder, for shimmer, for secrets, for a little magic sewn just beneath the surface. The moon is high now, casting its glow across the clay rooftops like a sleepy eye watching over the city. From your window, you can see flickers of torchlight where a few late vendors finish packing up their voices soft and low. You're still awake, wrapped in your shift, tracing invisible patterns in the weave with your fingertips. Not out of restlessness, but curiosity. Because tonight, you're remembering a rumor a tale passed between fire pits and bathing rooms. The Babylonian queen who brought back the loincloth. It sounds made up, doesn't it? The kind of historical hiccup that's too weird to be real. But the story has stuck around clinging to clay and echo because in the world of ancient underlayers, nothing ever disappears completely. The tale begins with a queen, Her name lost or muddled by time said to have ruled, or at least influenced, the Babylonian court during one of its more indulgent phases. According to a semi-broken inscription, she was known for her eccentricities, her foreign tastes, and most notably her insistence on wearing a loincloth beneath her layers. Not the kind worn by laborers or temple dancers. No. This was supposedly a lavish, embroidered, perfumed bit of linen and gold thread. A fashion statement. And she didn't keep it hidden either. During festivals and royal processions, her underrobes were cut just high enough at the hem that the decorative ties of this unusual garment could be seen peeking beneath. Subtle but deliberate. Some called it vulgar, others bold. A few scribes even recorded poems about it, clearly thrilled to have something juicy to write about that wasn't grain quotas or tax records. One fragment reads, "She walks with a knot of gold where laborers wear robe. The queen has wind her cloth both veil and blade. Poetry or propaganda?" Historians still argue. One camp believes this queen's loincloth was a nod to ancient Sumerian traditions, when men and women alike wore simple wraparound skirts and loincloths as daily wear. Others think it was a calculated move to reclaim autonomy over the body, to recenter the underlayer as power rather than modesty. And a few, of course, think the story is nonsense, an embroidered metaphor that somehow made its way into literal interpretation. But here's the thing. Evidence suggests she wasn't alone. In the decades that followed her rule, a new fashion trend appeared in some upper-class households. Linen underwraps tied high on the hip embroidered, not just with patterns, but with names. The wearer's name. The maker's name. The names of goddesses or lovers hidden in the weave like whispered promises. You've never worn one yourself. Not like that. But you've seen one once folded neatly in a market basket of second-hand cloth, clearly once expensive, now faded and torn at the corner. You didn't buy it, but you still think about it. What would it feel like wearing something so unnecessary? Because that's what it was ultimately. Not a layer for warmth or modesty. Not protection against the elements or fabric chafing. It was decorative, symbolic, possibly ceremonial. A quiet rebellion against practicality. A recentering of the self underneath it all. Of course, the trend didn't last long. Eventually, royal advisors pressured the next queen into more appropriate robes. The fashion faded. The loincloth returned to its usual place, worn by dancers, laborers, maybe the occasional temple initiate. But for a brief, strange moment, it had its comeback. And with it came a renewed conversation about what belonged closest to the body. And who got to decide. You shift now, adjusting your own underlayer. No gold thread here, no high-cut hem. Just soft linen tied with a plain sash perfectly suited for sleep and privacy. But still, your mind plays with the idea. A tiny tie, a flash of embroidery, a quiet declaration of individuality worn under all the other layers. That queen may be forgotten in the history books, but not in the stitching. Not in the sudden curve of a wrap skirt at a festival, or the young bride who embroiders a secret name into her inner sash. The whispers live on. In the hems. In the folds. In the quiet rebellion of a garment no one is supposed to see. You exhale, smile, because even in the ancient world, fashion was never just about fabric. It was about the stories sewn into it. The silence deepens now. Even the breeze has grown quiet, like it too has curled up and gone to sleep. You lie still, linen shift loose and soften from the day's wear, your thoughts drifting outward beyond your room, beyond the city, beyond even Mesopotamia. Because tonight your mind follows the scent of foreign fabrics carried on the backs of camels and the hulls of river barges. You think of bright bolts unrolled in shadowed courtyards, of fingers trailing along exotic textures, of women whispering, "Feel this." Welcome to the world of trade routes and fancy fabric flexes, when underlayers went global and the gods of cloth met the markets of ambition. Imagine this: you're the wife of a wealthy merchant, and your home sits not far from one of the main caravanserais along the Royal Road. Your husband deals in tin and copper. You, however, have more refined interests, namely the strange, marvelous fabrics arriving from distant lands. You wait for them each month like clockwork, each shipment a bundle of promise and rumor. One day, a new bolt arrives. It's not quite linen, and it's definitely not wool. It has a texture unlike anything you've handled. Cool to the touch. Woven impossibly fine. Some say it came from the Indus. Others swear it's Egyptian. You don't care. You want it. And what do you do with this new treasure? You don't flaunt it as a robe or turban or curtain. You hide it beneath everything else. You stitch it into a shift and underlayer so luxurious that only you and perhaps the woman who helps you dress will ever feel it. That's the power of imported fabric, not just visibility, but intimacy. This wasn't uncommon among the elite. As trade routes expanded across the ancient Near East Mesopotamian households, gained access to cotton from the Indus Valley, dyed silks from Proto-Chinese kingdoms, flax blends from Egypt, even ultra-soft bast fibers from unknown plants. The outer robes might stay traditional for social reasons, but the underlayers, that's where experimentation happened. Why? Because no one policed your underlayer. A priestess might be bound by temple dress codes. Outer robe of bleached linen sash, tied 3 fingers below the breastbone, but beneath that she might be wearing a shift made of cotton light imported thread that took 6 months and 20 favors to acquire. No one would know except her, which is what made it so satisfying. And then, of course, there was the flex. You'd hear whispers at the well she's wearing Indus cotton under her outer wrap. Imported. Of course, her brother's married to a caravan leader. Well, mine came from Elam. The fringe doesn't curl in the heat. It was competitive. It was subtle, and it was delicious. Even in underlayers, fashion had a hierarchy. Local flax was respectable. Temple-spun flax better. Imported flax beaten and softened by foreign hands, possibly perfumed before shipping. That was status. It meant your family could afford not only the material, but the taxes, the risk, and the time it took to get it to your hands. Some underlayers became heirlooms. Yes, linen wears out. But elite imported pieces, especially those used only for ceremony or feast days, were folded, stored, and passed down. You've seen one once pale green, impossibly light the stitching done with such precision it barely existed. Don't wear it for cooking, the owner joked. It costs 2 goats and a second marriage. There's even a theory that certain imported fabrics were believed to influence fertility or health. One woman, according to temple records, refused to wear local flax during her pregnancy, opting instead for a foreign fiber blessed by the moon. Whether it worked is anyone's guess. But her underlayer became a family legend. Of course, not all imported cloth was real. The markets were filled with fakes dyed local linen passed off as exotic thread, rough cotton sold as temple spun. A sharp-eyed woman learned to test by touch, by scent, even by the way the fabric folded. Real imported cloth had a fall, she'd say. A kind of humility. You could feel it in how it clung, not clingy, but close. Familiar. Sometimes fashion took strange turns. For a brief moment, one city popularized underlayers made from a gauzy, net-like fiber, thought to be Egyptian in origin. Breathable, yes. Modest, not remotely. Still, for elite house parties and private garden feasts, these shifts became all the rage. You'd wear a heavy robe over top, but underneath barely there. A silk whisper, a secret thrill. The trend faded quickly. Too expensive. Too fragile. Too many jealous glances from sisters-in-law. But it left a mark that your underlayer could be a place of experimentation, of rebellion, of art. Back in your quiet room, you press your fingers against your own shift. Local linen, soft, Worn, not fancy. But in your mind, you travel still to distant weavers, foreign dyers, the caravan woman who ran her fingers across the bolt and said, "This one will be remembered." You wonder what underlayers future women will wear, what stories they'll stitch into their hems, what fibers will wrap their skin touched first by someone 1,000 miles away. And you smile, because beneath every robe, under every sash, there's always a layer no one sees. And that's where the best stories begin. The lantern has burned low now. Shadows ripple across the ceiling like soft waves, and the room feels like a cocoon, quiet, linen-scented, wrapped around you like the layers of a well-folded shift. You're barely awake. But just before you drift off completely, your thoughts return to the one sense that ties it all together: smell. Not of incense or roasted barley, but of fabric, of skin, of status. Because tonight we're exploring the strange but powerful idea of the smell of underlayers and what it revealed about you. You inhale deeply now, catching a faint blend of dried herb skin oil and something vaguely smoky clinging to your shift. It's comforting, familiar. But in ancient Mesopotamia, scent wasn't just personal, it was political. It told the world who you were, how wealthy you were, and how close you lived to the gods. Let's start with the elite. If you were a noblewoman or temple priestess, your underlayer never smelled like sweat. At least not publicly. Instead, it carried the scent of cedar myrrh, frankincense, or almond oil ingredients imported along dusty trade roads at great expense. Your linen was washed not just with water, but with herb-soaked brews. It dried over burning reeds to absorb the smoke. It was stored with sachets filled with crushed petals, dried citrus peel, or ground pine resin. There's a delightful, if slightly snobby letter from a merchant's wife to her sister-in-law that includes the line, "Your linen came to us and I knew it was yours by the soap ash smell." Ouch. You chuckle faintly at that. Because yes, smell gave you away. If your shift smelled like barley ash and river clay, people knew you were washing it yourself with the ingredients at hand. Respectable, certainly, but not glamorous. If it smelled like smoke, you probably lived in a single-room home where the cooking fire shared space with the bedding. If it carried no scent at all suspicious, what were you hiding? Some women overcompensated. There's a tablet from Sipar that records a servant being chastised for using too much aromatic oil on her mistress's underlayers. Apparently, she used a whole jar of jasmine resin for a single rinse, and the scent was so overwhelming it disrupted temple offerings. That must have been some laundry day. But it wasn't just about luxury. Scent had ritual weight too. Priestesses sometimes applied oil before dressing to create a kind of olfactory shield between their skin and their linen, especially during purification rites. The shift wasn't merely clothing, it was a mediator, a filter between the mortal body and divine attention. The scent helped sanctify that space. You weren't just dressed, you were prepared. And here's where it gets quirky. There are recipes. Yes, actual surviving formulas for underlayer perfumes. Written in cuneiform shorthand, of course. One particularly popular blend called for 3-drop cedarwood resin, 2-drop sesame oil, crushed chamomile, heated gently and stirred with a bronze spoon. The result, a scent said to keep the skin cool and spirits obedient. Historians can't decide if that's poetic or medicinal. Either way, it smells better than goat tallow and reed vinegar. Even funerary linens, yes. Burial shifts were treated with scent. A noble woman interred in Ur was found with layers of linen soaked in pine resin and floral oils. These were wrapped directly against the body. Whether this was to honor her soul or simply to keep her fragrant in the afterlife remains open to interpretation. And let's not forget romance. There are clay tablets containing love poems where a man describes his beloved's underlayer as smelling of first figs and new rain. Another calls her the woman who wears the breath of morning. No mention of perfume flasks or fancy jewelry. Just the memory of cloth worn close to skin, warmed by breath and movement, and laced with the intimate scent of living. You smile now, your own shift tangled at the thigh, warmed by your body and faintly scented from the oil you used earlier, mint, and sage, homemade, nothing elaborate. But it holds your presence. It's yours. Anyone could identify you by it. And in fact, that was common. In households with multiple women wives, sisters, servants' linen often got mixed up during laundry. Scent was one of the only ways to keep track. This one smells like clove and smoke. It's Dana's. This shift smells of thyme and rosewater must be the daughter's. Not unlike how we recognize someone by their perfume today, except less commercial, more woven into the self. There's even a story told in hushed tones, maybe apocryphal, about a woman who tricked her rival by secretly scenting her underlayer with garlic oil before a festival. The result, mild public humiliation, and a lifelong mystery about who smelled like stew that evening. Not all underlayers were fragrant, though. Among the poor fabric was washed sparingly, oils were reserved for cooking, and the only scent came from daily life. Smoke, labor, clay, sun. These were honest smells, unrefined but rich in their own way. You stretch now, breathing in deeply the faint scent of your shift rising with you. It smells like you, like long days, like clean skin and salt and something else, something older. You roll onto your side and smile, eyes finally drifting closed content, in the knowledge that beneath every robe, every sash, every temple veil, there was always a story told in scent. The fabric may have whispered, but the smell, that was the voice. You're dreaming now, but lightly caught in that drifting place where thoughts move like smoke and nothing quite settles. You shift beneath your blanket, your linen underlayer, cool against your back, and you imagine something tucked in the seam, a secret stitched close. Because tonight we're peeling back the fold of mystery woven into ancient hems and waistlines, exploring the quiet, protective, and sometimes poetic tradition of secrets sewn in the seams. To the outsider, an underlayer was simple. Just linen. Maybe wool. A few knots. But if you looked closer, felt along the hem, turned the garment inside out, you might find more. A stitched pocket, a hidden bundle, a line of thread in a color not used anywhere else. Women in ancient Mesopotamia were not just wearers of cloth, they were curators of it. They didn't just dress for the day, they prepared for it, armed with tiny charms, quiet prayers, and personal tokens sewn into their most private layers. What kinds of things did they hide? Let's begin with the practical. A small pouch stitched to the inside of the waistband could carry a sliver of dried herb like mint or sage thought to ease nausea or ward off evil eyes. Some women placed pieces of smooth pottery or beads tied into a scrap of cloth believed to bring good luck or soothe anxiety. Others sewed locks of hair, usually from children or lovers, into their garments. Not whole clumps, just a few strands wrapped with colored thread and tucked near the heart or hip. It was a way of keeping someone close even when they were far, even when they were gone. And then there were the written things. You've heard whispers of linen hems stitched over thin slips of parchment or inscribed clay shards nestled in pockets. Tiny prayers, secret names, words that no one else should read except maybe the gods. May this cloth guard my body. Let my womb be safe. Keep me hidden from sorrow. Are these stories real? It's hard to say. Historians argue as they do, but the possibility is beautiful. You shift now, your hand resting just above your hip, where your own sash passes over the seam. There's nothing there. Not tonight. But once years ago, you stitched a single date pit into a fold at that very spot. You don't even remember why. It's gone now, worn away or lost in one of the washes, but you remember the act, how deliberate it felt, how quiet. Some secrets weren't symbolic, they were tactical. A woman might stitch a coin or two into the hem of her underlayer, not much. Just enough to barter with in an emergency. This wasn't standard practice. Of course, it was done quietly, often during times of uncertainty, during war, during travel, during periods when one needed options. One temple record even mentions a seamstress dismissed for hiding temple wax in the folds of her garment to sell at market, the record states. The theft wasn't discovered until the garment was washed and the wax melted into an oily stain. Let that be a lesson. Even divine underlayers have rules. There were also romantic secrets. One famous love poem, etched into clay and preserved for centuries, mentions a woman who sewed a lover's gift into her shift and wore it to bed. His token stitched where dreams begin close to my skin beneath the seam. You sigh softly now, imagining the delicate pleasure of that act. A pebble, a dried flower, a scrap of cloth. Nothing large, nothing flashy. Just a presence felt only by you. There's a theory that newlywed women often stitched protective knots into their underlayers before the wedding night, not for seduction, but for comfort. Something known, something sacred as they stepped into a new life. Sometimes a knot was untied together, sometimes never. Of course, not all secrets were sweet. Some were stitched in anger. A loose thread deliberately hidden to prick the skin. A knot made in bitterness. A red thread, bright and jarring, stitched through an otherwise plain shift, meant to signal something the wearer didn't dare say aloud. Grief, betrayal, resistance, and no one would know. Not unless they undressed you fully. Not unless they turned your garment inside out, felt every seam, ran fingers along every fold. Which, in a world of privacy and propriety, was unlikely. These secrets stayed yours. You think now of the underlayers stored in your cedar chest, folded, mended, familiar? You wonder if they carried traces of the things you've sewn and unsewn over the years. You wonder what someone would think centuries from now if they found your hem and peeled it back. Would they find a whisper, a knot? A story no one else heard. Maybe, or maybe just thread. But even thread carries intention. You roll to your side blanket, tucked to your chin shift, smoothing beneath you. No charms tonight, no knots. But the memory of them is enough. Because in a world of noise and rules and formality, your underlayer was the one place you could say exactly what you needed without ever speaking a word. The darkness is thick now, heavy like a wool robe pulled over your head. You lie still beneath your blanket. Breath, slow heartbeat. Quiet, your linen underlayer, the only thing between your skin and the night. And it's then in this hush that your thoughts drift not to the body but to the washing. Because what goes next to your skin must eventually be washed. And in ancient Mesopotamia, washing an underlayer was an act of precision patience, and at times a bit of low-stakes drama. You imagine the sun rising over the rooftops, the sky pale and hopeful, and already the women are up buckets, sloshing water, steaming in pots. Clay basins lined in neat rows. The washing days were scheduled, often communal and absolutely essential. A linen shift wasn't like a modern shirt. It was intimate, frequently worn, and often touched every part of the body. Which meant, well, you can guess. Sweat oil, the occasional stain from dates or wine or things left unsaid. And so the washing process was ritualistic. First came the soak. Underlayers were left to rest in large pots or shallow pits filled with water mixed with reed ash or crushed soapwort root-a-sudsy natural cleanser. The ash helped lift oils. The soapwort added foam. If you were wealthy, you might even add a bit of scented oil or dried flower petals to the mix, especially if the shift belonged to someone important, or if it was to be worn during a festival. Then came the beating. No, not violent, but rhythmic, satisfying. Women used paddle-like sticks or their bare hands to slap the wet fabric against flat stones. It wasn't just effective, it was therapeutic. There are even records of songs sung during the beating chants that timed the rhythm. Strike once for the dust, twice for the lies. Cheeky, but practical. After beaten, the shifts were rinsed sometimes several times and laid out to dry on ropes, flat rooftops, or smooth stones. Linen dried quickly in the Mesopotamian sun, but there was always a risk dust. Too much wind and your freshly washed underlayer might become a magnet for sand and airborne grime. Which is why clever women learned to pin corners under baskets or place faintly damp cloths over the top to keep out debris. Others dried garments indoors, hung from beams or woven lattice screens where shadows danced across the cloth like whispers. But here's the secret: not every underlayer was washed equally. Some shifts, especially those with charms, delicate seams, or woven herbs, were only partially washed. A sleeve, a hem. The rest left untouched to preserve the integrity of its sacred elements. In some households, women spoke to the cloth as they washed it, offering little blessings or apologies. Forgive the water. Forgive the sun. Be clean and come home to me. Quaint maybe, but deeply personal. Then came the folding. A clean shift wasn't balled up or shoved into a box. It was folded carefully sometimes into thirds, sometimes rolled around a dried fig leaf or scented twig. Some women used color-coded stitches in the corner of each garment to identify whose was whose: red for the elder sister, blue for the mother, white for the youngest daughter. A few households even embroidered small symbols: a bird, a sun, a spiral into the inside hem. Practical, but with flair. Storage mattered too. Clean underlayers were kept in woven reed chests, clay jars, or even hanging sacks made of loosely woven flax. The more upscale your family, the more elaborate your storage. One palace inventory describes a cedar-lined box with ivory hinges for the ladies' linen. Another lists a room entirely devoted to garment drying and scenting, where fabrics were aired over embers of myrrh and laurel. But let's not forget the moments when things went wrong. Once in a while, the water pot would crack, the ash would run out, a shift would be torn during the beating. And when that happened, out came the repair kit. Tiny bone needles, twisted thread, fingers practiced in the art of mending tiny rips with invisible stitches. Underlayers were too valuable to waste. Even the humblest shift might be repaired a dozen times before retirement. There's a tablet fragment that simply reads, "I return your linen mended. The rip has been bound. The stain remains." Which, depending on your mood, sounds either like a laundry receipt or a metaphor for life. You smile softly now, because you understand it. The care, the attention, the quiet intimacy of lifting a shift from water, smoothing its edges, folding it like a letter to your future self. Historians talk about temples, kings, wars, treaties, but they forget the hands wringing water from cloth, the fingers smoothing hems, the quiet pride of a woman who knows her linen is clean, soft, ready. You reach down, fingers curling around the edge of your own underlayer. Washed last week, folded with care, still carrying the scent of mint and sun. There's nothing glamorous about laundry, and yet there's something sacred in the way a shift dries in the wind. The night has grown long, like a well-worn tunic with sleeves that graze the floor. Your breath comes slower now, each rise and fall like the tide against smooth clay shores. But your thoughts haven't quite let go. Not yet. Not until you've wandered through one final curiosity: how these ancient underlayers were passed down. Because linen fades, wool unravels, but meaning lingers. Tonight you're tracing the soft, well-stitched lines of inheritance and memory, how underlayers became heirlooms, tokens, and even testaments to entire lives. You can picture it clearly now: a mother kneeling by a cedar chest, carefully unfolding a shift that once belonged to her mother. The linen, yellowed at the seams, is still intact. Fragile, yes, but wearable. Or nearly so. She lifts it to her face and inhales. The scent is faint clay herbs, maybe beeswax. Then she folds it again and calls to her daughter. This was how lineage was preserved in cloth. Not the outer robes that everyone saw; those could be copied, borrowed, even faked. But the underlayers. These were intimate. Stitched with fingerprints softened by movement, shaped by the exact rhythm of a woman's life. Passed not for fashion, but for connection. Some families kept ceremonial shifts special garments, worn only during rites of passage, a girl's first visit to temple, a marriage ceremony, the birth of a child. These were often embroidered with small symbols, a crescent for growth, a spiral for protection, a reed for adaptability. And after the ceremony, the shift was washed, dried, and packed away until it was needed again. Or passed on. There's even a record half legible from a merchant's will that includes the line, "And to my daughter the first shift her mother wore beneath the wedding veil." You smile at that. Not because it's romantic necessarily, but because it feels so human. So precise. This wasn't just her clothes. This was that shift, that moment. A piece of memory made tactile. But inheritance wasn't only about bloodlines. In temples and among servant households, underlayers were sometimes gifted passed from elder to apprentice, or from one favored companion to another. To receive someone's underlayer was not simply to gain clothing, it was to be trusted, included, wrapped quite literally in the history of someone else's skin. One poem carved on a clay tablet so small it fits in your palm reads, "She gave me her linen when the river rose, wore it no more. Now I walk in her story." Some of these garments were kept even after they were no longer wearable. Folded, wrapped, stored with dried herbs to preserve what little remained. Others were ritually burned, especially shifts worn during illness, mourning, or heartbreak. But even in flame, the act held reverence. You weren't just discarding fabric, you were releasing it. And then, of course, there were the forgotten ones. The shift folded and pushed to the back of a storage jar, never passed down, never remembered. The one hidden in the corner of a wall during renovation. The one buried with a woman who had no children, no heirs, but who still packed it with care for the afterlife. You've probably seen one in a museum without knowing. Fragments, threads, a few faded stitches. Historians label them textile remnants. But to someone once they were everything, a beginning, a comfort, a memory carried on the skin. And now, lying still beneath your own linen, you wonder what would they pass down from you. Would it be the softest shift? The one you wore on festival days? The one you embroidered in a quiet moment? Not because anyone would see it, but because it helped you feel anchored. You imagine someone unfolding it years from now. Fingertips tracing the hem, a whispered, "This was hers." That's the quiet magic of underlayers. They weren't always seen. They weren't always praised, but they were the first and last thing a woman touched each day. The most personal part of her world. Her warmth, her shield, her story. And when the world changed around her, when the city fell or rose or shifted its gods, the underlayer stayed. Adapted, softened, waited. Now you close your eyes, your own shift, worn from years of use, and feel a kind of peace settle into your bones. Because even if no one remembers the exact shape of your robes, they'll remember how you lived in them, how you folded your story into seams, how you gave warmth to those who came after, how, in the quietest layer of all, you stitched your name, not in letters, but in care. The hour is soft, now tender and silent. The city beyond your walls is asleep. Rooftop still hearths cooled. Even the dogs have ceased their restless pacing. You lie curled beneath your blanket, your linen underlayer, warm from your breath and body. The world is hushed. And as we close this journey, let's drift one last time, not through fabric, but through feeling. Because tonight we're settling into the quiet question. What did it feel like, truly feel like, to wear an underlayer in ancient Mesopotamia? Not what it looked like. Not how it was sewn or washed or passed down, but how it moved with you, wrapped around you, held you. You rise in the morning before the sun has fully touched the street. The floor is cool beneath your bare feet. You lift the folded shift from the edge of your sleeping mat. It smells faintly of herbs juniper, perhaps. A hint of smoke from last night's fire. You slip it over your head. The linen brushes your shoulders smooth and just slightly stiff from drying in the sun. As it settles into place, you feel the gentle weight of it, not heavy, not clingy, but present, like a second skin. It's not just about modesty, it's about memory, familiarity. The way the fabric stretches just a little at the elbows where you always lean. The way the hem swings near your ankles and reminds you not to step too quickly. There's a comfort in the routine wrap. The sash twice, not to softly adjust the shoulder seam. You don't even think about it anymore, not really. Like breathing, like blinking. And yet, every day it grounds you. You go about your tasks, you grind grain, you stir lentils, you kneel at the temple gate. All the while the underlayer moves with you. It absorbs the small heat of your labor. It shields you from the rough inner seams of your outer robe. It clings slightly where you sweat and lets go again when the breeze returns. And then in quieter moments you notice things. The way it cools against your back when you pass through shade. The faint whisper of fabric brushing your thighs as you kneel. The small itch at the collar where the stitching has come a little loose, but you don't fix it right away. Because that corner, it reminds you of something. Someone. A day when you laugh too hard while mending. At night you take it off gently, not carelessly. You don't toss it aside. You fold it not because anyone taught you to, but because that's what you do. The act feels like a pause, a punctuation mark at the end of the day. Sometimes when the night is too warm, you wear nothing but the shift. No robe, no sash. Just the linen, soft and familiar, cooled by the breeze coming through the slats in the wall. It's then that you realize something strange and true. This underlayer has known you more intimately than any person. It's caught your breath in the quiet moments. It's been there for grief, for laughter, for festival mornings and sickbed evenings. It has absorbed your scent, your shape, your story. And one day it will wear out. A tear that cannot be mended, a stain that won't lift. The weave will grow thin, threadbare, and finally, inevitably, you'll let it go. But tonight is not that night. Tonight it cradles you, wraps you, keeps you. Because it is more than clothing. It is witness. It is ritual. It is home. Now let your body soften. There's no more story to follow. No more seams to trace. Just the gentle press of the bed beneath you, the whisper of cloth against skin, and the quiet hum of night holding everything still. You're safe now, wrapped not just in blankets, but in the warmth of all the women who came before, those who folded linen in moonlight, who stitched prayers into seams, who held their breath beside cedar chests remembering. You carry them now, their softness, their strength, their silent wisdom woven invisibly into every thread. Breathe in. Let your chest rise slowly, then fall like the rhythm of a reed, swaying in warm wind. Feel the fabric move with you, no longer something you wear, but something that holds you, supports you. There's nothing you need to do now. No decisions, no names to remember, no knots to tie. Only the quiet understanding that you are cared for, not just by others, but by yourself. Every act of comfort, every worn underlayer, every tiny ritual of care has led you here, to this stillness. You've done enough today, truly, so let your thoughts float further away like bits of thread carried on a breeze. Let the memory of old looms and warm wash basins blur into the dark, and if you wake later, half dreaming, half aware, you'll still feel it. The quiet companionship of linen against your skin. Whispering softly, "You are home, you're held, you can rest now. Sleep well,